The 12th of January is the birthday of Takehiko Inoue. This week, the seasoned mangaka turned 56 years old, shortly after releasing a movie on his most successful manga, which he personally directed. The iconic sports manga, which honestly redefined its genre and was completed 27 years ago. But today we're not here to talk about Slam Dunk. One of my older video essays is on that very topic if that's something you're interested in. Today we are here to talk about his second most successful manga, Vagabond. Yeah, the seinen masterpiece he hasn't released a chapter of in 2,794 days. If you know me, you know how much this story means to me. Vagabond is my absolute favourite work of fiction, and I say that with complete certainty. There is truly nothing that comes close. It is everything I desire from a story. And chapter 301 of this story is the pinnacle of Vagabond, which of course makes it the greatest chapter in manga to me. I think about Vagabond often, but it's been doing overtime lately. Since the Inoue interview that was released last month on the 2nd of December, I cannot stop thinking about this story. Inoue has finally expressed the desire to continue drawing the manga after 7 long years of complete silence. I am eagerly and impatiently waiting for the announcement of chapter 328, but in the meantime, I have to voice my love for this story. I have refrained from making big Vagabond videos for a while because it just doesn't perform well for me on YouTube. But right now I don't really care. I want to share my love for this story, and even if barely any of my subscribers watch this, it'll be worth it for the few who do. If you love Vagabond as much as I do and would like to see more content on the series, please leave a like and comment to support this video and help with the algorithm. If this video somehow does well, I'll have all the motivation I need to make as many Vagabond videos as possible. With that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoy this analysis on what makes the 301st chapter of Vagabond the absolute greatest I have ever come across. Vagabond is essentially the character study of Miyamoto Musashi, an actual legend who existed in our world. He is a revered figure in Japanese history and considered one of the greatest men to embody Bushido, a Japanese value system which personifies the samurai era. He was many things, including a swordsman with an undefeated record of 61 duels, a philosopher, a strategist, a writer, and above all, a very inspirational human being. His written work has influenced many people for centuries and continues to do so today. The Book of Five Rings, being his most notable work, details numerous battle strategies and analyzes kenjutsu and the martial arts in general, whilst being an allegory to life itself. Dokodo, or The Way of Walking Alone, is his final work, which was written only a week before he died and consists of 21 principles for life. There have been countless works of fiction made about or featuring Musashi. He's an incredibly important figure in Japanese history, and so Takehiko Inoue's task of bringing this character to life is a very difficult one. A very personal one, which I assume carries a lot of responsibility due to the cultural significance. The fact it has 80 million sales, but you couldn't find any remotely good English scans of it online until a few months ago, is telling in of itself. A majority of its audience is Japanese, and for good reason. This is a story ingrained in Buddhist beliefs and Japanese history. And on top of that, Vagabond is ultimately an adaptation of one of the best-selling novels in history, Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa, an incredibly important book to the Japanese which Inoue has the task of adapting as a manga. It's a difficult task, and I want to make that very clear because a lot of people think making adaptations is always easier than making an original story, because you have source material to work from. But in reality, original stories aren't shackled by the burdens of expectation. How many movies or anime series have been received terribly solely due to their missteps in adaptation rather than any actual problems with the story itself? There is an element of satisfying the already existing audience of the story when you take on any sort of adaptation. But despite that, Inoue still makes very bold decisions. For example, one of the 3 most important characters in the story, Sasaki Kojiro, is completely different in the manga versus the novel. In Vagabond, he is a deaf mute, very childlike and very innocent, whereas in Musashi, he is cocky, he can speak, and he is painted as quite cruel to others. This is a huge difference given that Kojiro is one of the most important opponents Musashi ever faced in history, and their dynamic is the heart and soul of this story. And there are countless more changes. Inoue has stated in an interview that initially he was sticking quite closely to the novel, but that changed as time went on, which ultimately makes Vagabond very much its own story despite being an adaptation in name. Now, why am I going through all of this, and how does it tie into the greatness of Chapter 301? All of this context makes this chapter feel all the more real. It gives it a very cool balance of feeling authentic as a moment that happened within history, whilst also simultaneously feeling fictionalized and true to Inoue's vision. Especially if you've read Slam Dunk and Real, you can truly feel Inoue's writing style shining through the pages. And that's important to me, because what takes place in this chapter is very personal. It's confusing, abstract, profound, and emotional, and it's the product of 300 chapters worth of build-up. Everything in Vagabond works up to this moment, an epiphany that sets Musashi on a new path, the right path. In order to appreciate the weight of Chapter 301, one must observe all the pieces that build up to this crucial moment in Musashi's journey. The story began with Musashi, at the time named Takezo, in a very bad mental state. He is angry, hateful, lonely, and bitter at the world. He has lost all will to live, and he is treated like a monster by everyone around him. But with the help of Takuan and Otsu, he finds purpose and a desire to continue living. A life away from the violence and needless killing. He fakes his death and Shinmen Takezo is reborn into Miyamoto Musashi. 4 years pass and he embarks on a new journey. Instead of just throwing himself into warfare and trying to make a name for himself through ruthless battles, Musashi will take a more sophisticated route in trying to achieve his dream of becoming invincible under the sun. Instead of killing people in cold blood, he will kill trained samurai in organized duels. In essence, he's still killing people, but it's a pretty big change given the nuance of his perspective. These samurai live and die by the sword, so Musashi doesn't consider this to be the same as what he was previously engaging in. He makes his way to Kyoto, where he immediately challenges some of the most renowned swordsmen in the entire country, the Yoshioka clan led by Seijiro. A pretty ballsy and overconfident move from Musashi because he gets embarrassed and is only able to leave with his life due to a stroke of fate. A fire, accidentally set by none other than his childhood best friend Matahachi. This fire is set during a duel between Musashi and Denshichiro, the younger brother of Seijiro. He is reunited with Takuan, who gives him some very cryptic lessons that he struggles to understand at the time, but they live on within Musashi for the rest of the series. The duel between the two men is postponed for a year, in which both Musashi and Denshichiro will train and prepare themselves. And to prepare, Musashi immediately goes to duel somebody far more powerful than Denshichiro could ever hope to be. Inshun of the Hozoin clan. Through fighting Inshun, Musashi learns to conquer fear. He learns to accept the possibility of death and his insignificance in the grand scheme of the universe. He learns to be more composed, edging closer to a state of complete equanimity. And here he meets Inoue, a legendary warrior who is everything Musashi is striving to become. He will live on within Musashi for the rest of the series. In the next arc, Musashi meets Yagyu, another legendary figure at the time who also lives within Musashi from that point onwards, and he delivers a very important line that will stick with Musashi forever. Invincible. it's merely a word. The goal Musashi has been striving towards is devoid of any real meaning according to the very person who embodies that goal in Musashi's eyes. This is also where we are first introduced to the concept of being infinite. In the same arc, the important Buddhist symbol of Enso captured Musashi's attention. He leaves the Agyu estate and tries to begin looking inward, but he doesn't completely understand the words of Takwan, Ine, and Yagyu. They're obviously very cryptic and told to him in a way that forces him to contemplate and think introspectively. They never spoon-feed anything, because knowing these things in theory is useless. They are rooted in experience. You can't just understand these concepts by being told them, you have to learn for yourself and find your own meaning. And shortly after this, he meets Shishido Baiken, a man he once knew as Tsujikaze Kohei, a man who once tried to kill him but is now a shell of his former self. Musashi is intrigued in the art of the chain and sickle, and so they engage in a duel despite both not wanting to kill each other. But since Kohei can only use the weapon with lethal intent, both of their lives are on the line, and Musashi kills him. But we didn't find out about this until 140 chapters later. Kohei loses his fingers and is glad he can't ever have to fight anymore. He's through with the fighting. He's through with the spiral of death and killing. And then it happens. Kohei pleads for Musashi to save him and the girl with him, Rindo. And Musashi does tend to their wounds, but he is later consumed by an inner darkness which makes him return to the shack with an intent to actually kill both Kohei and the little girl with him. But they were both already dead, and Musashi realizes the man who had lost died a bold death, and he who had supposedly won had to sneak off and run away. The more Musashi won, the stronger he became, the more his dream of becoming invincible slipped away from him. While we get Kojiro's backstory, the Vagabond spends his time vagabonding and honing his craft to a wicked degree, becoming stronger and stronger until finally it's time to return to Kyoto and duel Denshichiro. But the night before the promised day, Musashi is visited by Seijiro and gets the duel he was always looking for. Denshichiro was never his goal. He has always wanted to fight Seijiro because he knows him to be the stronger of the two brothers, and so this is exactly what Musashi wanted. Seijiro fights with a purpose. He is fighting for the honor of his school and for the love he feels towards his younger brother, whereas Musashi just wants to test his strength to become invincible. He'll do anything to win, even resorting to cheap tactics like kicking the embers of the surrounding wildfire to use to his advantage. I want you to remember those flames. This battle is the absolute height of Musashi's villainy in the story. He may be the protagonist, but in this fight against Seijiro, he is the bad guy. He is fully cognizant of the spiral he is trapped within, and he doesn't care. He loves it. He loves the battleground. He loves killing, and he is fully convinced it's the only place he belongs. Musashi is completely enamored by this battle, so much so he begins drooling before delivering his final attack, which cuts Seijiro clean into two. This was only the beginning of Musashi's epic battle against the entirety of the Yoshioka clan. But oddly enough, after this fight, Musashi feels emptier than ever, and he can't understand why. He goes on to make short work of Denshichiro, which only makes him feel worse, and the remaining members of the Yoshioka decide they have to kill Musashi. They must enact vengeance on the man who murdered both of their leaders, and so begins the Battle of Ichijoji. 70 skilled samurai versus one monster, an entire school of trained samurai versus one country hick raised by the mountains. An absolute bloodbath where Musashi comes out victorious and only suffers one considerable strike from a sneak attack. But now Musashi is considered a criminal and a notorious mass murderer, the demon who single-handedly wiped out the entire Yoshioka school, and he feels absolutely terrible about it. This summary is only that, a summary. There are a lot of nuances in every step of this journey. Musashi is a very multifaceted character, and there are conflicting thoughts and emotions along the entire way. I mean, he didn't fully want to engage in the battle. He's not completely insane, and he was afraid of fighting 70 men. He tried to run away, but returned, because that would be against his morals. Unfortunately for Musashi, he suffered a very serious leg injury in the fight, which will make properly fighting again a difficult task to say the least. At one point, Takwon thought he may never walk again, but does he even need to? Hasn't he achieved his goal? Surely he can't get stronger than this. Surely Musashi is now invincible under the sun, and thus we receive the most important conversation of this entire story. There's no way for me to summarize this effectively. The chapters following the Battle of Ichijoji are of the highest level of storytelling I've personally come across, packed with so much depth I could genuinely make a video on every single chapter after 242. But in a nutshell, Takwon tells Musashi that it's still not over. He still has hope. He can move forward from this and become a better person despite his past actions. He can give up on the sword completely and commit to Otsu, who he very obviously loves. And despite the immense suffering he is feeling, Musashi is still indeed connected to the heavens. Musashi learns to understand himself, what motivated him, how the killing made him feel, and that invincible under the sun was just a mirage. It vanished as soon as he approached it. That's all it was, and it took 22 years for him to realize that. He's offered an opportunity to choose a new path, to teach people everything he's learned and start a family. But unfortunately, he hasn't learnt enough. You see, Musashi has been invincible before, the invincible he has always envisioned and strived to achieve. As a young child, he reached a state of complete equanimity and understanding, infinity, and he conflated that feeling with becoming physically powerful enough to make a name for yourself and be globally recognized as invincible under the sun. Now he wants to go back to the cave with the samurai skeleton, to that feeling he had, body and soul centered, neither tense nor loose, his body a mere speck amongst the infinite things around him, but somehow still connected to it all. He's not done with the sword because the art of swordsmanship is the key to that feeling, the key to transcendence as he understands it. This is where things get very abstract and hard to understand because Vagabond becomes almost entirely philosophical. But there's nothing wrong with being confused, especially since Musashi himself is driven by a desire he doesn't fully understand, and we as the audience see everything through his perspective. Musashi is trying to understand Takwon's words and become infinite once again, and that's why he needs to return to the sword to find one last life or death battle that requires him to give everything he has. Perfection of technique is what Musashi is striving towards in simpler terms, and just because he's picked up the sword again doesn't mean he willingly wants to return to the spiral of killing. He is through with that, but he's being hunted down by swordsmen who want to make a name for themselves and offers them a chance not to fight, drawing a circle one sword's length around him and promising not to leave it. But of course they enter the circle and he has to kill them. No matter how hard he tries to escape the spiral, he is trapped within it. And there's a very important detail here because Musashi's actions can be seen as taunts, as Ueda's ghost addresses. Is he really trying to leave the spiral of killing, or is he just making excuses for himself? Is he heading towards the light, or is he still drawn to the darkness? He is willingly placing himself in situations where he is forced to engage in killing, but Musashi feels as if he has no other choice. You see, Inoue places a massive importance on the intention of his characters. Musashi begins heading towards the Yagyu estate where he encounters somebody we've seen before, and we get the most important 1v1 battle of the entire series. The man recognizes Musashi from the Battle of Sekigahara as the wild beast who fought alongside Kojiro, but then the man reveals he is Ito Itosai, a legendary swordsman Musashi has always looked up to. He's on a level of skill and power Musashi has never seen before. He hasn't met anybody like this in the past. Ito is on a different caliber, so understandably this is a huge test for Musashi. To make matters worse, as a kid Musashi personally sculpted a figure of Ito and reported to him after every duel, asking for his praise, and here Ito is now standing before him, praising him and saying he looks like a treasure. Musashi is very conflicted. The darkness within wants to fight, but the light he is heading towards is pushing back against against that. He tries his very best to avoid fighting Ito, even smashing his injured leg into the floor to control himself and push back against the darkness that wants to fight. But he is forced into battle, and Musashi's subconscious conjures Yagyu as an onlooker of the battle. Throughout this fight, Yagyu's involvement as a figment of Musashi's imagination is absolutely integral. Musashi is knocked out by Ito and enters a deep state of contemplation. First, he has a conversation with Yagyu in his mind whilst Yagyu dies in the physical world. Yagyu leaves Musashi with one important message: you should smile more, which is just so beautiful when you appreciate that this is happening in Musashi's head, and so he's essentially telling himself to smile more. He then continues unlocking memories from his childhood and the thoughts he had regarding his form. At the age of 13, Musashi was having out-of-body experiences. He could see himself from a third-person perspective, and he came to the conclusion that his body isn't him. It's a vehicle that carries his soul, and that he was someone else before inhabiting this body, that his soul is not constrained by this. He thinks that everything in the entire universe exists for that purpose of unity, that all is one. And the 13-year-old boy stares at the stars and states, if everyone we meet is here for that purpose, then there's no need to hate anyone. But suddenly, he stops thinking that way. He embraces the persona that has been imposed upon him by his father and the rest of the villagers, a demon child, and he states that he will become invincible under the sun, which he conflates with becoming a sword demon. Musashi assesses his behavior in the Ito confrontation and determines that fear is currently his most bothersome enemy, and in fact, it always has been. Fear, in order to hide itself, calls out to hatred, and the driving force behind it all is the spiral of killing. It's the source of fear which breeds more fear, thus making it a spiral. He still has some way to go before freeing himself from this spiral, but Yagyu's words stick with Musashi and he attempts to smile. He then goes on to ask himself what he's even doing, where is he going, and what exactly is he seeking out. He expresses a desire to go back to the cave from his childhood, but then immediately shuts that out by saying those are just words and he can return when he wants to. He can always go back to that feeling, he just needs to find it, and be in the middle of right now. Detract yourself from thoughts of the past and future. Focus on right now, this very moment. That is the key to Musashi's self-development. But this moment of inspiration is fleeting, because what comes after is a brutal self-assessment of his entire past. He finally remembers what Ito said before he knocked Musashi unconscious, and he has a very painful realization. Ito's philosophy is that it doesn't matter if what you're doing is morally right or wrong. What matters most is whether it's fun. It's a very dark way of thinking. Finding fun in killing people, ending their lives and ruining the lives of their loved ones. But without knowing, Musashi had been acting under the same mindset, and the truth crashes down upon him and truly hurts him. He thinks back on all the lives he has taken and covers his mouth in disbelief, tears streaming down his face, which is a very rare occurrence in this man's life. It was so fun, I could hardly stand it. But then we peer back into Musashi's childhood once again, back to when he was infinite. He felt as if he was being watched over by someone without a name, and he comes to a very important conclusion. Even in the very beginning, invincible under the sun didn't quite feel like the right way to describe what he was aiming towards. He called it the wrong thing, and tried to force a shape onto it, not appreciating that what he was aiming for is far greater than that. And so, 287, one of the most integral chapters of the manga, ends with Musashi thinking about Kojiro and expressing a desire to see him. This chapter is, in a lot of ways, a deconstruction of Musashi's character and journey so far, and 301 is the reconstruction, building him back up as a brand new man. Musashi spends the next few chapters trying to perfect his craft, trying to flow like water, like Kojiro, to be one with his surroundings and reach a state of complete equanimity. His hand holding his sword should feel like the empty hand of a baby, effortless and natural, like he was designed by the heavens to function without any extraneous thought. He is being followed by various samurai who, actually want to try and recruit him as a member of the Hosokawa family, but he obviously doesn't know this and flees, jumping into a freezing cold river which makes him think of Kojiro before he falls unconscious in a remote village. He spends some time here with the suffering family, and he tells them his name is Takezo, not just because of the widespread stigma around the name of Musashi, but because he is desperately trying to return to what he once was as a child. In this village, he spends time with a struggling family and gets a taste of the suffering many people go through on a daily basis. It's a very strong prelude to the farming arc, which explores these ideas to their absolute fullest. The father in the family is a Buddhist sculptor who shares his transcendental experiences with Musashi. Like how Musashi as a child would have out-of-body experiences as he becomes engrossed with the art of swordsmanship, this man gets the same sort of experiences when he is sculpting Buddhas. You see, this idea is not constrained to a specific craft. It's not just about swordsmanship. Any form of art can give you this feeling, whether it be the fine arts like painting, sculpting, and poetry, the martial arts like swordsmanship, archery, or kung fu, and even practical arts that serve utilitarian purposes like woodworking or needlework. Anything that requires you to dedicate your entire essence. The old man states that all of these out-of-body experiences are all circles to the same center, and that center is where you will always return. These words resonate and also stay with Musashi. At this point, he is truly depressed. He is ridden with guilt. He is thinking about all the people he killed and the families he destroyed, all for the sake of fun. And despite that, he has decided to continue marching on with the sword and reach that state of infinity he caught a glimpse of as a child. Musashi believes that he needs to do this for both his father and himself. Otherwise, the lives they lived would be in vain. And this is really powerful, given the fact that Musashi's father is the source of an unbearable amount of trauma. And you can see the pain in Musashi's face acknowledging this in one of the most evocative facial expressions I've ever seen in manga. The sculptor tells him to give up the sword, and his wife tells him that he's incredibly kind and he needs to stop being so hard on himself. The children who fell in love with him as an older brother beg for him to stay or at least come back one day, and this makes Musashi cry again for the second time in only 7 chapters. He thinks about the woman he loves and he describes her. She's a hard worker, she's sincere, so straight, not a crooked bone in her body, but she's not uptight at all. She's playful, always clowning around, and she's so kind. Thinks about the happiness of others more than her own. How many times have I wished I could be like you, Otsu, says Musashi. This is really one of the most important sequences in the entire manga because it puts things into perspective for both Musashi and the reader. Otsu is the personification of everything Musashi is striving to become. She is soft and warm, and that is what it means to be strong in the context of Vagabond. He has one last monologue where he is feeling cut off from the center that the sculptor described, the light that represents the unity of the universe. Even the trees seem to be ignoring Musashi, and these negative thoughts bring back the demon within, the manifestation of Musashi's fear that is driven by the spiral of killing. We get a perspective shift to Kojiro arriving in Kokura, and finally, 6 chapters later, we arrive at the greatest chapter in manga. I know I spent a lot of time on that summary analysis thing there, I know, but I cannot understate how crucial it is to fully understand everything that happens before this chapter in order to properly appreciate what makes 301 so good. Chapter 301 opens up exactly where 294 ends, with the first meeting between Musashi and Toyozaemon, a member of the Kokura clan who has been sent to recruit Musashi. The chapter is titled Path's End, a fitting name for the final chapter of the Wandering arc. Like I said, Musashi just nosedived into negativity, and the demon within him has resurfaced once again. He tries to ignore Toyozaemon and walk away from him, but he cannot control his fear. Fear to hide itself masks itself as hatred, and Musashi, without even hearing out the man, immediately asks him if he wants to be cut down. He observes the man's appearance, namely his stance and katana, and he concludes that the man must be from some high-ranking clan. He's actually not wrong about that, but he's wrong in his assumption that this man is here to fight him. And then Musashi gets goosebumps. His body is warning him against fighting. It's telling him that fighting is dangerous, but Musashi just views that as all the more reason to fight. This is strongly connected to Musashi's roots, the reason why he pursued this life of fighting to begin with. He sought after strength as a means to defend himself from the dangers that other people posed, as a form of protection as an abandoned child with nobody to care for him. His own father viewed him as a demon, and his mother abandoned him. So Musashi is conflicted. His body is warning him against fighting, but his mind tells him that this is exactly why he must fight. His body and mind are the furthest thing from centered, from infinity. And without even drawing for his sword, the demonic presence Musashi exudes is enough to frighten Toyozaemon and make him flee, to which Musashi is visibly very disappointed. What comes next is one of my favourite little instances of implicit storytelling. A bird soaring the skies defecates on Musashi from above and then flies in a circular motion. There are two important meanings here that become clearer as you progress through the chapter. To be infinite is to be one with the universe itself, and that is the essence of Musashi's growth in this chapter. By having the bird poop on him, it's almost as if the universe itself is opposing Musashi through this act. The bird flying in a circular motion is what's really crazy though, because it symbolizes one of the most important symbols in Buddhism. Enso, which represents infinity through emptiness, unity, the cyclic nature of life and death, and it is also referred to as the mirror of the moon. All of these ideas are integral to this chapter, and in only the 8th page, Inoue sets the stage for arguably the most important moment in the entire story. Musashi is left feeling empty as a result of this encounter, which actually makes very little sense in a vacuum. Why is he left feeling empty when this level of martial might is what he always strove for, to be widely recognized as the strongest, as invincible under the sun? Surely if you can make a high-class samurai flee just based off of your presence, you have reached that dream of yours. So why? Why is Musashi left feeling so empty? Making people run away, succumbing to the darkness within, his mind not being in tune with his body. It's the furthest thing from the feeling of infinite he yearns for. Instead of unity, it is complete isolation, and that's what makes Musashi feel so empty both literally and figuratively. We get a seamlessly integrated flash forward that shows us Matahachi in the future, serving the role of the story's narrator and retelling the very events we are currently reading to a group of onlookers. This adds so much weight to the chapter, and makes these events we're experiencing feel like a story of legend. We are witnessing the life of a man who will be spoken of for generations to come, both within the story of Vagabond and in the meta sense, because this is literally a person who lived in our world 400 years ago. Back to the present, and Musashi bumps into an old man, a former student of the great Yoshioka Kempo, the father of Seijiro and then Shichiro. This man feeds Musashi, even after he initially refused. The man kindly urges him to have some rice cakes, and then they sit down and have a conversation where we get another very cool implicit detail. The strange butterfly that serves as subtle foreshadowing for what this chapter ultimately accomplishes. Butterflies are a product of a metamorphosis, a transformation, and this chapter marks the death of one Musashi and the birth of another. The old man explains his mission, to hunt down the very man he is talking to. Musashi's expression here during the conversation is incredibly powerful, full of guilt, hurt, and fear for the imminent confrontation between the two. He describes Musashi's appearance, which is brilliantly utilized in the following pages, as they are repeated in the form of a monologue as the old man slowly realizes the person he just fed is none other than the person he's searching for and wants to kill. He immediately goes to attack Musashi only to be killed in a single effortless slash, and then Musashi regurgitates the food attitude he was given by the man he killed, a display of disgust at the act of killing. I also think this is similar to the bird pooping on him in the sense that the universe itself is preventing Musashi from gaining any nutrients from this man whose life he's just ended. All is one, but more on that later. The man's hatred and intense desire to see Musashi killed, even at his deathbed, is strongly reminiscent of Ueda in the final moments of the Battle of Ichijoji, haunting Musashi beyond death. Which is very notable because Musashi's greatest conflict at the moment is the fact that even if he wants to be a better person and give up the sword, it's not like people are gonna accept him with open arms, and the next sequence is dedicated to that idea. A monk marked by flames shares a story with Musashi. A long time ago, a wildfire engulfed the mountain behind us. Have you ever seen a wildfire? Said the monk. Once it gets going, there's no way to stop it. You can only wait for it to die down. Swordsman, what I overheard reminded me of that fire I saw as a child. You appear to be a rabbit fleeing the flames. I suppose if you were the one who set the fire, then you must pay the consequences. This analogy of Musashi's journey is genuinely perfect because it works both literally and figuratively. The flame motif especially completely captures Musashi's journey up until this point, bringing everything full circle in such a satisfying, all-encompassing way. Musashi picked this fight, and now he is suffering the consequences. Flames have always had a strong involvement in the narrative of Musashi versus the Yoshioka. In the first Yoshioka arc, Musashi's life was saved by Matahachi's accidental starting of a fire. Musashi chose to pick that fight right at the start of the story out of his own free will, but his life was saved by a stroke of fate. In the second Yoshioka arc, Musashi acknowledges the similarity between a wildfire and the way of the sword, or the spiral of killing. A flame does not light easily, but once it does, it can go wild. Musashi chose to light this flame. He had countless opportunities to avoid the way of the sword, but he dived right into it, and now he is suffering the consequences of that decision. In his battle against Seijiro, he uses that very wildfire as a weapon. He uses cheap tactics against a man who is fighting for the honor of his family. That fight is the turning point of the story. Musashi may have won, but he used dirty tactics and was fighting for the sake of fun, in comparison to the more honorable and respectable disposition of Seijiro. And it leaves Musashi feeling empty, but of course at that point it was already too late. The flames had been lit. The Battle of Ichijoji was underway, and that brings us to the current day, where Musashi is now a rabbit fleeing the very flames he personally lit. He goes on to kill the two acquaintances of the old man after being attacked by them, and dwells on the situation he is trapped in. He remembers the old man's words. The humiliation of the school was haunting him, and all the students of Yoshioka Kempo must feel the same way, and their response to that haunting is to haunt Musashi. The spiral of killing isn't just this abstract concept anymore. Musashi killed people, and now there are people who want to kill him in response to the killing. It's a never-ending thing, and this idea can also be applied to the structure of the narrative, but that's a topic for another day. What follows this is a moment of deep contemplation. We get a depiction of Musashi's soul leaving his body, the center he will always return to, and he is stabbing himself. This is Musashi finally acknowledging that the bulk of his trauma is a product of his own decisions, that a lot of his suffering is self-inflicted. Musashi isn't Musashi anymore. He has changed considerably, but the man he once was has placed him in this inescapable predicament. What could possibly fix this situation he's trapped in? The spiral of killing he so desperately wishes to escape from is following him at every turn. A powerful commentary on how the more mistakes we make, the harder it is to move on from them. It's a monopoly of difficulties, a spiral that feeds into itself and continues to grow more and more powerful. And so, Musashi returns to the earth. I have reread this chapter literally hundreds of times, yet I still find myself struggling to fully comprehend the complete meaning behind this sequence. It's one of the boldest, most powerful ways to progress a character. This is the culmination of Musashi's entire journey up until this point, so the entire manga up until this point, the turning of a new leaf, and it is deeply rooted in abstract Buddhist philosophies. It's a sudden moment with no dramatic build-up. It's subtle, and therein lies the beauty. It's not exaggerated or overplayed. It's everything Musashi has ever gone through coalescing into enlightenment. And that's so powerful to me because it's true to the human experience. How often is it that we find the key to happiness or moving on from hardship by constantly searching for it, or by being placed in a situation that forces it out of us? Now, I'm not saying that isn't possible, because it damn sure is, and everybody has their own unique experiences. But the most common form of growth and understanding that we go through happens completely naturally. It comes from making the same mistake again and again and again, but holding a deeply ingrained desire to keep moving forward despite that suffering. And sometimes you can't understand what exactly it is that makes you come to a certain conclusion, and you don't really need to understand, especially when it comes to such heavy and existential matters like the meaning behind human existence, which is essentially what Musashi discovers for himself here. Some things simply cannot be understood, and it is through accepting that fact that one can truly move forward when faced with these existential ambiguities that have plagued humanity for millennia. A lot of the time we come to conclusions based on instinct. Logic and science can't be applied to these fundamental questions. That's why philosophy even exists. Humanity has failed to collectively agree upon the meaning of human existence since the dawn of time, and what Vagabond proposes is that the meaning of human existence is connection. Musashi falls to the ground and comments on that, but he quickly corrects himself and says, no, that's not it. The stars are just as high as they ever were. Thinking back on his childhood and the moment he realized there's no reason to hate anyone. The recurring idea of unity within the universe, that all is one, that you're just a mere speck in the world but simultaneously connected to everything, that you are infinite but everything is within. It's like after the Ito fight where Musashi wanted to return to the cave and dismissed that idea because he should be able to return to the cave whenever he wants to. He just needs to be in the middle of right now to reach a transcendental state of equanimity and understanding. Ultimately, this is a very personal idea that is rooted in experience and perspective. The conclusion Musashi comes to is that he is insignificant. Whether you're standing or laying on the ground, the height of the stars doesn't change one bit. In comparison to those stars, you're nothing, no one. You don't matter, and there's a beauty in accepting your insignificance in the grand scheme of the universe. Embracing the fact that you don't matter is humbling. Rather than wasting your life trying to make a name for yourself that will eventually be forgotten, this gives you the ability to live in right now, to accept every moment as it is and cherish the very little valuable life we do have, as insignificant as it may be, not to dwell on the past or the future. We all die someday, and many of us do want to live on after death through our legacies, but even that will die one day. So embrace the fact that you're like a speck of sand in a desert, which is also a speck of sand in an even bigger desert, because that's what our world is. Humans are like tiny dots on Earth, and Earth is like a tiny dot in the universe. It's a very optimistic and grounded outlook that inspires me every day, despite me not even fully agreeing with the ideas presented here, which is just such a bizarre and powerful feeling. By accepting this reality that he doesn't matter, Musashi is reinvigorated. The first person Musashi thinks of upon having this epiphany is Takehiko, whom he now considers his master, despite telling the old man he has no master earlier on in this very chapter. This is an indication of his transformation and genuine understanding. Takehiko has been used throughout the manga to give Musashi answers that he can't fully comprehend, because words are just words is essentially the thesis of this story. It's one thing to hear something and be able to repeat it, and it's another to experience it for yourself and wholly understand the weight of those words. The full moon on this night ties into the Enso symbolism, which, as previously stated, is considered the mirror of the moon. Vagabond is littered with the exploration of dualities. In this video, I've probably mentioned like 10 already. It promotes the idea that to truly understand something, one must understand the inverse of that that thing. To understand strength, you must understand weakness. To understand love, you must understand hate. To understand happiness, you must understand anger. The list goes on. Everything lies on a spectrum. Musashi and Otsu sit and stare at the same moon and think about each other. For Otsu, it's just another night missing and longing for the man who has always prioritized his ambition over his love for her and never reciprocated her emotions, but little does she know, for Musashi this is a silent confession of his love. This is him finally coming to terms with his feelings and what he actually wants. Not to be invincible under the sun, but rather to be loved. And not just by Otsu. He wants to be infinite, a part of the universe, and to have somewhere he belongs. Togetherness or unity, another aspect of the Ensor. It's just beautiful. The way these pages are drawn is brilliant too. 301 is the first chapter after a long hiatus, and you can really feel that Inoue put his all into it. It's cinematic and feels expertly directed, with each page seamlessly weaving into the next. But to be fair, that's most of Vagabond. There are many overarching ideas explored throughout this chapter. The one I want to focus on mainly is the theme of connection. Ultimately, this is what Vagabond is all about. Unity, togetherness, to embrace other people. Musashi feels empty when he makes the man retreat at the beginning of this chapter because he realizes the dream he envisioned has isolated him more than ever before. He is sickened by the act of killing, the dismissal of life's value. Everybody in the country's after him. He's infamous and wanted, which makes it incredibly difficult for him to connect with anybody, on top of his already awkward personality and lack of social skills. Being the most sought after man in the country whilst also being the loneliest is a powerful juxtaposition. Musashi has always been alone. He struggled to fit in with others as a result of childhood abandonment and being raised by the mountains. That's why his bonds with Matahachi and Otsu are so intimate. When Musashi is at his absolute worst, mentally and emotionally, the main thing to spur him on and keep him moving forward is this silent confession to Otsu. Something to look forward to, something to push on for, the desire to make it so that he can one day live with Otsu, to finally connect with somebody. And so he turns a new leaf and smiles, sincerely and unapologetically. This time it isn't forced or difficult to do. His smile is completely genuine, and he is assisted in it by the depictions of Yagyu and Ine. Their lessons finally make sense to him now, even if slightly, and the chapter ends with Musashi marching on at life like a brand new man. The character of Miyamoto Musashi has been reconstructed in an entirely new light, and the next 22 chapters of the farming arc are completely dedicated to studying the ideas presented in this chapter. But before we end this video, I said we'll talk about that later in regards to All Is One a couple of times, so let's do it. What does All Is One even mean? What does it mean to be empty and yet completely full? The farming arc goes to extreme lengths to explore these concepts, but none of that would have been possible for Musashi if not for his epiphany in this chapter. Laying on the ground, staring at the stars, Musashi learns to appreciate the interconnectedness of the universe. That rather than existing independently, everything in the world exists in relation to everything else. Think about it. The only reason you're sat there watching this video is because I had to make it and upload it, and Inoue had to draw the manga for me to find out about this story, and Eiji Yoshikawa had to write the novel for Vagabond to ever exist, and Miyamoto Musashi had to live 400 years ago for Eiji Yoshikawa to have written that novel, and Musashi's parents had to have engaged in intercourse for him to have been born. If we look at it from a more biological perspective, we have the cycle of life. Even after death, you remain a part of the universe. Your body decomposes and becomes food for animals which are eaten by other animals, including humans. Everything in the world is composed of energy and feeds into itself. We are all connected in that sense, but we also have our own sense of individuality. After all, we are the personification of our life experiences, and recognizing that each individual is divergent simply by nature and embracing each other despite these differences between us is strength. Connecting with the entire universe itself, understanding your place and role in the world, and understanding the different aspects of your upbringing and environment, how that shaped your characteristics and worldview, your individuality. Embracing the things that make you you. you. That is strength. I'd love to go even deeper into this idea in the context of Vagabond, of course, but all of this is further explored in what I consider to be the greatest arc of manga, the farming arc. And that's actually a big reason as to why I consider 301 to be the greatest chapter in manga. It serves as the linchpin for the farming arc to exist and be the greatest arc, which is kind of a scapegoat conclusion for the video, because in order to explain that I'd have to make another entire video. Who knows, maybe this was my plan all along, to get you to like, comment and subscribe so this video performs well and I feel motivated to make another video diving deeper into the farming arc and further explaining the concepts explored in this chapter. Making this video was a very beautiful experience, guys. I really love this story, and even though I have a strong feeling this video isn't gonna do too well, I don't really care. I'm just happy I was able to write this 9,000 word script and edit this video on the manga that is so close to my heart. And honestly, even if this doesn't do too well, I'm gonna try and make more Vagabond content, because there really is nothing I love more than talking about this story. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way here to the end, and I hope you enjoyed. I've been Radman, peace.